reality that Sardinia was once inhabited by a race of giants.
Originally, there were apparently 30,000 nuraghi all over the island. Now the estimation of the nuraghi is approximately 7,000 to 8,000 around Sardinia. These towers were the expression of the megalithic architecture, which is also called Cyclopean. The legends mention Cyclops who built these megalithic structures around the island. They might have been very impressive and imposing in those times, because when the nuraghi were first built, the single tower could reach even 30 meters height. It was like a skyscraper of the prehistory. And Cyclopean, because of the legend, as if they were built by cyclops or giants, but also because of the use of massive boulders, of massive stones, which were set in circles with no use of mortar binding. It must have been really hard to lift them, to move these stones, and even today engineers wouldn't know how to build this type of constructions anymore.
The impressive stonework exhibited in the nuraghi towers is prototypic of the classical Cyclopean style. Cyclopean masonry is an archaeological term used to describe an antediluvian engineering technique which incorporated large stones without the use of mortar. Cyclopean masonry is the trademark of megalithic architecture all over the earth. The style ranges from rough-hewn stone structures, as prominently displayed in the nuraghi towers of Sardinia, to incomprehensibly precise edifices devised with immense polygonal blocks, perhaps best illustrated in the walls of Sacsayhuama in Peru. No one knows exactly how the megaliths were built, because the knowledge of Cyclopean masonry vanished from the earth. But what we do know is who the ancients believed were the builders. All across the world where megaliths are present, legends of giants abound. The ancient Greeks, from whom we derive the term Cyclopean masonry, attributed megalithic building to a particular kind of giant, the Cyclops.
According to the Greeks, the Cyclopes were the one-eyed offspring of the gods who were famed as gifted craftsmen and masons. The Greeks credited the giant Cyclops with building the megalithic construction found in Greece and throughout the Mediterranean. The Greek historian Pausanias recorded that the walls of Mycenae and Tiryns and Peloponnesus were built by the Cyclops in ages past. Clans of Cyclopes were rumored to inhabit the islands of the Mediterranean. In his epic poem, The Odyssey, Homer recounts the harrowing voyage of Odysseus, king of Ithaca. During his wanderings in the Mediterranean Sea, Odysseus and his crew enter a cave on the island of the Cyclops, where they encounter Polyphemus, a savage one-eyed giant. Polyphemus devours some of Odysseus's men before they put his eye out with a spear and escape the island. In the next chapter of the story, Odysseus and his men are carried in a storm to a place called Laestrygonia, which is a land inhabited by cannibalistic giants. The giants devour many of Odysseus's crew and destroy all but one of his ships.
The Odyssey is obviously a work of fiction, not to be taken literally. But like many of the legends composed by the ancient Greeks, it may be laced with historical fact. The mystery schools and fraternities of builders throughout history have utilized the insignia of the cycloptic eye in its many motifs to communicate knowledge originating from a celestial source. The single orbed eye, open and watching, invokes the Watchers, who descended to the earth in the antediluvian age, their forbidden knowledge and their hybrid offspring. The Cyclops is the embodiment of these concepts. But was the Cyclops more than an esoteric symbol to the ancients? Was it a real flesh and blood creature? In Sardinia, many believe it was, citing the small island of Sant'Antioco in the southernmost province, known as the Island of the Cyclops.
My name is Paolo Valdes. I was born in Sant'Antioco in 1944. When I was young, I explored a lot in the mountains. And so I saw many skeletons among the ruins and the old houses in the countryside. One day, when I was 8 years old, I was grazing oxen in the mountains. There was a nuraghe nearby, so I decided to go and explore it. I went inside of the nuraghe and discovered the giant skeleton of a man partially buried in the ground. When I looked at the skull, I noticed that he had only one eye socket in the middle of his forehead. Instead of two eyes, like a normal man, he only had one. He was very large. I could see his feet sticking out of the ground. He was much larger than a regular-sized man. And this happened in the area known as the Land of the Cyclops.
Sant'Antioco lends credence to the Greek stories of Cyclopes in the Mediterranean. Not only are there ancient folkloric accounts of the Cyclops inhabiting this region of Sardinia, there are also contemporary claims that the skeletal remains of cycloptic giants were unearthed some years ago in plain view of the townspeople before being secreted away with threats of violence if anyone dared speak of it. Many of the people we spoke with in Sant'Antioco affirmed that they had heard of the incident, but were unwilling to go on camera. Some even told us that the Cyclopes were exhumed right in the middle of town, where the megalithic remains of an archaeological excavation can still be seen. I had no way to confirm if these rumors were true, but what I can confirm is that highly secretive and restricted excavations are still taking place in Sant'Antioco today. We were able to film one such area where some believe that the graves of giants had been discovered and were being disentombed. Could it be that the legends of giants and cyclopes in Sardinia are true? Are their remains being exhumed in secret and then hidden away to protect the conventional narrative of history and the institutions that propagate it? The answer is self-evident for those who have seen the bones.
My name is Luigi Muscas. I am 53 years old and I live in Poli Albarei. I've been immersed in the ancient history of the giants of Sardinia ever since I was a little boy. It was handed down to me by my relatives. The first skeleton I ever saw, the first mummy I ever saw, was on a rainy day in the countryside of Poli Albarei. I was out grazing my father's sheep in the fields near the ancient ruins, when suddenly it started to rain. I got caught in a violent thunderstorm. I looked for a shelter among the ruins to get out of the rain, and I found a small stone doorway leading into a megalithic tomb buried in a hillside. When I crawled inside of it, I found the body of a dead giant. He was huge, more than 10 feet long. He was mummified and well preserved. His skin was the same color as mine. He had all his teeth. None one of them was missing. I counted them. There were 32. I wasn't even surprised to find him there. It only confirmed what my relatives had always told me. We were the descendants of the giants. He had a huge head. His legs were this thick. And there was still skin covering the whole body. And even the tendons were still there. The tendons connecting to the fingers. I told my friend about it, and we came back together to play with the giant. We used to joke around with his fingers and make them move by pulling on the tendons in his arm. We had fun pretending he was still alive. We played with the giants for a couple of weeks, until they took him away.
This is one of the alleged tombs that giant bodies were discovered in. In fact, this whole side of this hill overlooking the town of Paoli Albare had tombs embedded into it. This particular tomb here is the tomb in which Luigi saw his first giant when he was a boy. Luigi says the head of the giant was here, facing the sun, facing the east, and the feet of the giant went underneath. This used to be a structure with a roof, a sarcophagus, and it's been filled in with dirt. So in other words, what we're standing on now was not the bottom of the tomb by any means. It went much further down, and it was large enough for Luigi and his friend to get down into it when they were children. So it has been purposely filled in with dirt, so you can no longer access whatever's inside of this tomb. We're going to measure this just so that you can see that it also is certainly large enough to fit the body of a giant. Remembering that we're basically measuring the top of what was the roof of this sarcophagus. So it doesn't necessarily give us the accurate measurement. It would have been larger within, but we can show that definitely it was large enough to accommodate the body that Luigi found. From where the head of the giant would have been positioned to this rock face, which is not the bottom of the sarcophagus, but the top of the sarcophagus. Luigi tells us that the feet of this particular giant extended down underneath this stone, which was the roof. We have a measurement of well over 11 feet.
As you can clearly see, this is all that remains. These ruins were left because I stopped the excavators. They wanted to plant trees, like those trees over there. They wanted to destroy everything. The tombs, the pyramid, the other step pyramid over there, and part of the nuraghi. They wanted to destroy all of this, to plant trees and provide work for the youth. But it was just an excuse to cover up this history. So that day I was eating, and I felt compelled to leave my house and rush up here. I didn't know why I was coming, but it happens like that for me. When I feel I have to go, I go. And so I drove here with my car. I was speeding like crazy to get up here. When I got here, I stopped the excavators who were destroying everything. I told them, stop, and they stopped. They were under specific orders from the authorities to get rid of everything, because these are the last ruins of this lost city, of this history, and they wanted to eliminate it so that nothing would be left.
I've seen many times now the attempt by different governments, different organizations to cover up certain artifacts or certain megalithic sites by simply obscuring the view, in most cases by planting trees, either around or in front of the objects that they don't really want people to be looking at. In this case, Luigi can personally testify to the fact that these trees right around this area where these tombs of the giants are were purposely planted in rows with the expressed objective to hide what is here from the view of the villages below. Basically, it's a way of saying there's nothing to see here, don't pay attention to this, and certainly no tourists come to this particular spot. Nobody's here, ever. In fact, there's fences all around here that are broken down to keep people out. These also used to be tombs, equivalent to the ones we've already filmed. There were at least 2 or 3 here in this row. There were dozens of tombs right in this area, right along this hill. And right in front of these tombs, trees planted in rows, with no other purpose, ostensibly, except to block the view of these tombs. I spent a considerable amount of time on that hillside, overlooking the village of Pauliarbare, inspecting what remained of the megalithic edifices that once stood there before they were intentionally broken to pieces by heavy machinery. One can clearly see that the debris of the demolition was simply scattered over the fields.